and welcome everyone at the React Native Show podcast with our series React Native at Scale. Today I have two incredible guests with me, Rafael Mendiola and Jakub Stadniczuk. In this series, we take guests from business sides of the products and we talk about the intersection of business and technology. We show the impact of technological changes on the product and on the organization. And our guests can share their hard-won knowledge about organizational challenges that they gained throughout their career as business consultants and as, in Jakub's case, development managers. So, Jakub, let's start from you. Can you please introduce yourself and tell us what you do at CallStack?
Yeah, sure. So, my name is Jakub Stadniczuk. I'm business development manager here at CallStack. I've been here for almost 2 years, so my role is to help figure out our new partners, how we can best support them around their needs around React and React Native. I've been working in sales in the IT industry for over 6 years now at various companies such as startups, scaleups, and yeah, now I'm at CallStack and I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And our second guest is Rafael Mendiola. And Rafael, can you please share some of the bullet points from your extensive experience?
So I have about 20 years of development experience, and I started out with Flash development, which was really influential for me. I've been working with all sorts of company sizes, startups, scale-ups, enterprises, both as a consultant and as an employee. And I've also had a wide variety of experiences. So, for example, I built a really interesting system for a management consulting company, which influenced me a lot in the way that I think about process and delivering products and making technology choices. So I've been involved with React Native for about 6 years. I think I was one of the very early adopters. It really caught my attention because of the operational benefits that it brings. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 6 years. And I hope I can share some of my experience with you.
Yeah, we hope as well. And I'm sure you will. Thanks so much. 6 years experience in bringing React Native to startups, scale-ups, enterprises. That is what is this series about. So let's jump into this. And maybe we can start actually with your career. And you said that you've been helping businesses of all shapes and sizes. So how does the adoption of React Native differ between startup and scale-ups and enterprises?
So if you're a company that's adopting React Native at some point, it means that you didn't have React Native before. So for a startup, you probably consider React Native very early in the process. I think it's really good to do your MVP in React Native. And I think a lot of startups are mostly choosing React Native nowadays just to get stuff working. It's a really good way to get an impactful MVP for iOS and Android. With that scale up, you probably have an MVP and you're probably achieving product market fit, but you might have already built a native app. So if you are a scale up at starting to use React Native, it means that you probably have an existing native app. The situations that I've seen are scale-ups that only have one version of the mobile app, so they'll have like the iOS app. In the US, iOS is much more popular than Android, so companies focus on iOS first because that's what the people in the company have.
Yeah.
And so a scale-up might be looking to add the Android version of their app, and that's usually when they start thinking about maybe we should just do this in React Native. And I think for an enterprise, I think it tends to happen when the enterprise has issues with delivery. So if you're a big enterprise, you probably have a surface area of web, iOS, and Android. And so depending on how you scale up your teams, you might have a unbalanced company, an unbalanced development team. So you might have a very, very big front-end development team and not so big iOS and Android teams, which that can lead to a situation where you're not delivering consistently to your users, right? Ultimately, what you care about is, how are you delivering value to your users? And if you have situations where your web application is far ahead of the mobile applications, or the iOS application is very different from the Android application, I think that's when you start considering as an enterprise that you should start looking into React Native. And those are typically the type of situations that I've seen.
Okay, thanks. That was a lot of context from startups, scale-ups to enterprises. 3 different approaches for 3 different phases of hopefully a big, successful company from startup to enterprise. So what are the main considerations for all of those groups? In other words, if I'm a CTO driving React Native revolution in such environments, what should I consider?
So first and foremost, regardless of whatever decision you're making, you want to think about the impact on your users. And so when you think about the impact on your users, you want to think about how quickly am I delivering features, and am I delivering features to the right platforms in a timely manner? So your operational effectiveness is one big consideration when you're making this decision. I think the other big decision is your talent pool. You probably need to consider what the makeup of your company currently is. So for example, like if you have a really, really heavy native development team that's working well, maybe you think about React Native a little bit differently. But if you have a lot of front-end engineers, for example, then that's a good reason to start thinking about React Native. And also just the talent pool that's out there. I think it's a little bit harder, probably harder and more expensive to find native iOS and Android engineers. Whereas React is really popular. There's a lot of React developers out there that can be easily trained to start working on mobile. So, access to the talent pool that's out there, the huge talent pool that exists in the JavaScript ecosystem, I think that's a huge factor when making these kind of decisions.
Yeah. So you said about talent pool, and I find that it is not necessarily that obvious. You said it's going to be relatively easy to train web engineers to become React Native engineers. I find that this is not that obvious, right? React Native has its own quirks, has its own limitations, let's say, and it's a little bit different than React on the web.
Yeah, for sure. We can talk about this in some of the later parts of the podcast, but it's not necessarily easy to jump from React Web to React Native. I think if you're a developer watching this and you work on web and you're thinking about moving to React Native, you have to remember that you're moving to a completely different domain. You're moving from the web to mobile, and that has its own challenges. And also, you got to know that you're going to have to solve iOS and Android issues. That's just part of the React Native lifestyle. So just get ready to be the kind of developer that is able to understand iOS and Android issues.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's definitely tempting, right, for organizations to think, okay, we have like those React developers, why not move them to React Native? But there's some very important aspects, like Łukasz mentioned, like for example, bearing in mind that you don't have like unlimited resources of a computer, but your users are using mobile phones, so you have to keep, for example, performance always at the back of your mind. And there's some traps out there, but it definitely like makes sense. And it might be a good move if you already have like a solid talent pool in your organization, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Let's check on those actually. Let's go to the next question. Which are the traps? So what's to look out for on the way to bringing React Native to the product from startup to enterprise?
So I think one of the biggest traps or one of the biggest hurdles that a company might face is the fact when they're bringing, in particular, like I guess web developers to mobile, is that mobile has higher standards of quality. In web, if you ship a bug, you can fix it right away, and it's no big deal. But in mobile, if you ship a bug, you really pay for it. In mobile, you have what's called like the long tail of versions. So we think that app updates are automatic, but that's not necessarily the case for all users. So when you launch a mobile application and you take a look at your analytics and you look at the different versions that are out there, you will see that there's actually a long tail of versions. So most of your users will be in the latest version, but a lot of your users will not have updated the app in like months or something like that. So if you ship a bug on mobile, you will not be able to take it back 100%. So that's one of the big considerations.
You could, there are some mitigations to this, right? You could like implement something like code push, and if your bug is in JS bundle, then you can push your update to all of your users at the same time. But those are, again, strictly mobile considerations that you have to take into account. Whereas in the web world, you just deploy and it's there. It's visible for all of the users at the same time.
Yeah, and setting up code push, it's a great tool. It takes a little bit of effort to set up. And my personal ideology is that even if you have something like code push, you still need to commit to a higher level of quality when you ship on mobile.
Yeah. I think this connects really well with web being this open ocean where you can just drop everything, publish anything. And like, of course, there is a web engine, search engines and like recommendations, stuff like that. But on mobile, you have this two big stores that will rate your app, that will allow user to rate your app and basically share an opinion that app that does not actually work for me. It's crap, right? But on the web, there is no such concept. So like you said, the quality bar is much higher on the mobile.
Yeah, I think like on that note, like it's much easier for organizations to lose credibility in their customer base, right? Because like you mentioned, you can just put it out there on web. And with app stores and Play Store, once you put it out there, you start gathering bad reviews. Some users might not be on the latest version of the application, but once you lose this credibility from your users, like it's very hard to regain it.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. The fact that web doesn't really have a review system. So if you ship something, that's bad quality on mobile, users will call you out immediately, and that affects your new user pipeline, because there's been plenty of times when I look for like a major app for like a major service, and it has like 3 stars or something like that, and that just makes me think that this is just not a good product. So you really want to manage your app rating really well.
It's basically neglected, right?
Yeah.
So I think this ties us well with the next question that I wanted to ask. So you have to maintain a high quality product because we are on mobile. So how about the team composition? How about the development environment? What kind of devs do you need to do that?
So my mentality is that you need to have a mix of expert native engineers, people who come to React Native from the native world, who are going to be really good at implementing native modules or fixing native level bugs for you. And if you have like a really good core team of those types of people, then you can start bringing in as many web developers as you can. Even if they don't have that much training in native issues, as long as you have a really good core team of native engineers, then you can start feeling a little bit more comfortable with the quality of a process. I think if you have a development team, especially like if you're a scale up or a big enterprise, if your React Native team is made up of people that only come from web development, then that's a little bit riskier. Once you're at a certain size, I definitely think you should start investing in some native engineers.
I think it really, I really connect with what you said about the mix of really skilled native engineers. And when you have that base, you can invite people from web to start playing around with mobile. Because if you don't have that people, then it's not only the product that hurts, but also like the dev experience of your developers, because someone has to understand the build system, someone has to understand the native tooling, someone has to build up that infrastructure so that everyone else can have a smooth ride after that.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to make people have to deal with issues with CocoaPods or something like that. Which can often
even
happen.
Xcode and Android Studio, just grasping the breadth of those tools can be really intimidating from somewhere coming from web.
Yeah, and even I had some Android experience before coming to React Native, and having to deal with the third-party dependencies and at the Gradle level, that was a little bit mind-bending.
Yes.
I know it definitely caused a lot of issues for me in the early days of React Native. I don't think that's the case anymore. But you could still have Gradle issues or pods issues or framework issues. In those cases, it's really good to have a pool of talent that understands how to solve those things.
Yeah.
And also, one thing to remember is that React Native does not necessarily replace native development. I have been part of teams that already have an existing native development team, and I'm bringing in React Native, and they've actually helped me out a ton. So there's definitely lots of opportunities to do really interesting stuff on the native level, even if you're bringing in React Native.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we are still in the subject of traps to watch out for when introducing React Native. So I want to ask you about both of you, Rafael and Kuba, for a bubble that I, as a mostly React Native developer and with some Android background, I live in. So what do you think about people reaching out for knowledge, where to look for knowledge, how to keep the team on their feet, how to keep them interested, informed, stuff like that?
Shall I go first?
Yeah, sure.
Right. Yeah. So I think that React Native is a great technology but people oftentimes might forget how quickly it's evolving. And if you close your eyes for a second, you might be already a couple of releases behind with some kind of with React Native itself or some other libraries that you've been using. And especially because of how great open source community is with React Native. And it's great that you have such a selection of tools and libraries that you can use in your project, but still it adds this pressure of keeping up to with, what's happening with the technology itself, right? I think that also like Meta is doing much better job with communicating with the community as well. However, like having companies such as CallStack or Infinite Red or Shopify or Microsoft that are backing up this technology and are also spreading the word and making the community more aware of all the changes really helps.
Yeah, React Native is an ecosystem with a large open source surface area. So it has been really helpful for me to keep my ear to the ground by going to conferences. In the early days, I used Twitter quite a bit to keep up with React Native, so that's a really good source of information. But I found it really useful in my career to go to conferences. I think I came to the first iteration of React Native EU, and I met a lot of people in the React Native community. I met some of the open source maintainers. I met people from Expo. I met people from CallStack, and having a good network of React Native developers that can just give you hints, or they can tell you the practices that they're implementing, that's actually really, really helpful for me.
Yeah, definitely. So you guys mentioned two things. You mentioned good source of knowledge, conferences, that you should take your knowledge from like verified sources like Meta and Microsoft and CallStack. But I feel like you forgot one thing. And that one thing is that you need people on your team that actually care about this, that actually are passionate about React Native, that actually want to get that knowledge. They don't, they passively accumulate the knowledge and are able to pass it on to the team. So just wrapping up this section about the team structure, you need great native developers to guide your product through the setup phase, through the native issues. And you also need great React Native devs, a few of them, to keep the product energized, to get the latest knowledge and to not get entangled with tech debt and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think in development teams, usually I'm that person, so I never think about that. But having people that really see the value, just the operational value, the development experience value, having people who really, really understand that is really important for the success of any React Native project.
So let me digress from my script just a little bit, Rafael. From your experience, did you have an opportunity to have a great native dev that got really engaged with React Native and started to be a real great React Native dev? Or do those two personas on the team are too separate always?
In my experience, those personas have been a little bit separate because that's the scenario in which I've encountered those have been in the enterprise scenario, not necessarily like in the scale up or startup scenario. In the startup scenario, the story's a little bit different.
You have a team of 3 people.
Yeah. And then if you're starting a mobile, if you've done a native app and you make the switch to like a React Native app, those people are going to be questioning their careers, right? But in the cases of the big enterprise, I have met engineers who started studying React Native and got really interested in it. And these are typically the people who understand the real value behind it. I think when a native developer, when their identity is tied to their technology, that's a little bit hard. But if you have really strong native developers that are general problem solvers and that are looking for the most efficient, effective way of delivering a product, those are the kind of people that will get interested in React Native.
Yeah, it's a super interesting take because like from our experience from Callstack, where we're introducing React Native in those big enterprises, like you can definitely see two type of native developers. Ones that are strongly connected with the technology they've been using for years, and they see React Native as a potential technology that may replace native in the company. And you also have the second group, those problem solvers. They just see React Native as another tool they can use to solve different problems. And for them, it's not a matter of choice which technology I should use, which one I should focus on, but rather like expanding their skill set to be able to solve the problem more efficiently and just simply better.
Yeah, and see the bigger operational value, like Rafael said. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about those benefits. We've been talking about struggles for too long. What are the core benefits from startups to enterprises of bringing in React Native?
I would say it's definitely operational excellence. I think React Native is the one way I know in which you can deliver value to your users on web, iOS and Android. React Native in particular because of the JavaScript layer. So you can use a lot of your front-end and front-end expertise and code base. You can leverage that across all platforms. So if you are, a leader in a company, you're interested in like, how do I deliver the most value the quickest? I think React Native is a big it's a big carrot to try to follow. That for me, like, it's the number one benefit. I just want to get the product out there a lot faster. I want to get it done faster than my competitors. I want my users to be delighted with the pace of updates. I don't want them to feel like, the iOS app or the Android app is behind web. So for me, it's just like that operational excellence portion of it. I think another huge benefit, especially when you compare it to other cross-platform tools like Flutter, for example, it's the benefit of having the JavaScript ecosystem. There are a lot of tools that are widely used in the JavaScript ecosystem. It's like very huge, it's robust, and you're going to use JavaScript in web. So just the ability to use JavaScript to build for all platforms, I think that's another huge advantage.
Yeah, especially if you already have a React web page, React application on the web. You can do similar things in Flutter when Flutter renders to like canvas on the web, but it's not really the same thing as coming from web React to React Native.
Yeah, I think it's a hard sell to want to refactor your web app just so you can support something like Flutter on mobile. Typically you want it to make things easier for you, not to force you to do a big refactor.
Yeah, definitely. Kuba, do you want to add something to obvious or less obvious benefit of bringing React Native through to the spectrum of companies?
I really like Rafael's take on like how we can keep the feature parity on all the platforms. But again, since everyone is using JavaScript, all the teams can speak the same language. And this is, from our experience, what can really facilitate the development on all the platforms inside an organization. And what I personally really like about React Native in those kind of situations is the flexibility it gives you. Because right now, you don't have to split your teams into different platforms, depending on if they deploy to mobile, web, or TV, etc. You can structure them however you like because they're all using the same language, and every one of them can jump in and help a different team at an endpoint. And I think this is what's really great. And it allows you to really build a great dynamic in your development team which wouldn't be possible to the same extent using native technologies, for example.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I like the idea of unifying, if you have feature teams, unifying that mobile and web experience, and having one team that is taking a look at that entire experience. When you have separate native teams, oftentimes they're in different parts of the organization. They have different PMs, so there isn't a cohesive vision of how this feature should work across all platforms. There's the web feature, and somebody else is coordinating the mobile feature, and hopefully they're talking to each other, but oftentimes that's not the case. So just being able to just focus on a feature across all platforms, that's a huge benefit.
Yeah, exactly. Because like what you mentioned, hopefully those teams talk to each other. But again, in case of native technologies, they're not even using the same language. So for example, if we talk to each other in English, it's perfect. But for example, if I started talking to you in Polish and you keep talking to me in English, like it's not gonna work. Maybe it's gonna work, but we're gonna sacrifice so much effort and time to make it work. Then when you compare it to the teams that are all using the same language, it's like a very big difference maker.
To wrap this up, I will just add one more point to your brilliant discussion about the team structure. We are actually forgetting a few different platforms. We are talking about mobile, iOS, Android, and web, but I work on a project that has a TV presence as well. So that's even additional platform, even additional team that is unified to this one unified product, which is like application for all of those platforms that everyone can contribute to different pieces on different platforms where they feel they can bring value. I want to move on from summarizing the team composition, and let's dive into adopting React Native in an enterprise setup. So starting from the very beginning, when I go for React Native, when would I do that, or when not to pursue that path as a business?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. So I would say if your mobile delivery is working really well, and if you're a large enterprise, then messing with that might be risky. You might get some operational benefits. If you have the mentality that you want to optimize even further, I think it's a good idea to think about React Native. But if you don't want to have a lot of risk in your existing product delivery or like the composition of your team, just keep, my thinking is just keep going with the native work, because that's clearly working for you.
If something ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, you can always improve it, but you need to be really thoughtful about what are the actual benefits that you're going to get. But that's often not the case, to be honest. So it's usually when you have like delivery issues. When you're not able to deliver features fast enough, that's when you want to start thinking about React Native.
Yeah, and I think it applies not only for releasing features, but generally the speed of your development process, right? Because again, when you're scaling your native teams, you may hit some bottleneck at some point where adding more people not necessarily helps you deliver faster because, for example, you want to keep this feature parity. So the, for example, Android team still needs to wait for the iOS team to finish their task, right? And with React Native, you're able to remove some of the bottlenecks. And again, you have this wider range of possibilities of how you want to structure your teams to improve the efficiency of their work.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so basically from our experience, if you see any kind of like the bottlenecks in the development and release process, this might be a case where you want to consider the switch of technologies. Because again, according to the Conway law, it would make sense to see that the results of the technology you're using affecting like how you're releasing the product. But again, like what we stand for at Callstack is the reverse economy law. So we want to allow you to use the technology of your choice depending on how you want to structure your teams and how you want to design the whole process of development your product.
You mentioned the word bottleneck, and I think that's a great concept. If you feel like there's bottlenecks in delivering your mobile apps, you definitely want to start thinking about how to optimize that.
Okay, so guys, let's say I'm this fictional CTO. I weigh in the pros and cons. I'm going to go for it. I'm moving with React Native in my enterprise setup. I'm not a startup. I'm not a scale up. I already have all that we discussed. I'm moving in with React Native. So how do I set priorities in such project? What are my ambitious and achievable goals?
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit tough. I'm not going to lie. And it has nothing to do with React Native. It has mostly to do with the fact that you're in an enterprise. So enterprises move a lot slower than startups or scale-ups, just because they have so many people. There's a lot of stakeholders. There's a lot of people to coordinate. So I would take kind of like a management consulting approach. Think about like what management consultants do when they first come in and start analyzing and making recommendations for the company. So the very first thing you want to do is just take an account of what your development process is like. What are the bottlenecks? What's going on? Talk to the developers, talk to the stakeholders. I think that's probably very important to do. Then I would say you probably really need to define for yourself what you want and when do you want it. This is one of the challenges of working in an enterprise, in that many times projects don't have focus. Many times teams are just working incrementally. So we are at point A. How do we get to point A prime? But in a transformational project like bringing React Native to an enterprise, you really want to figure out, we are at point A, how do I get to point B? And you really, really want to define your point B, and when do you want to achieve it? So the way that my experience in enterprise has been that we've had an existing native mobile app, right? You probably don't want to jump in and change everything. There's probably a lot of code that you don't want to throw away. So I think the first proof of concept that you should do is start building a brand new feature using React Native and trying to put it into the native mobile apps. So you might have cases where there's a feature that's available on web, but it's not available on mobile yet. So that's a perfect opportunity to try to reuse the code and the developers that built that web feature and figure out how to use React Native to bring that feature to your existing native apps.
So in that perfect scenario, you take something from the web, you try to share as much code as maybe not possible, but is good for that feature, and that way you can start convincing the stakeholders and convincing the developers on the other side of the equation that this is actually a good choice. For this particular feature, if we build it in React Native, we take it from the web, we gain such and such benefits.
Yeah, and the big benefit is that you have one team that is overseeing that feature on web and on mobile. So that to me is a huge win.
And what's great about React Native, it doesn't have to be a web feature implemented into mobile. Again, it can be any other platform as well, like for example, TVs as well. It's then super easy to show the ROI on this investment to the stakeholders. And I think what also really helps, and what we do at CallStack, is that for any kind of like digital transformation, if it either applies for processes or strict product development, we always try to use this DMAIC methodology, and we always want to make like data-driven changes. So then again, showing the efficiency and then correlating this with some kind of data that you collected as a baseline basically makes getting the buy-in from the stakeholders much, much easier. And we have to remember that we're talking about big enterprises where there's a number of stakeholders and every one of them has some kind of goal in their mind, right?
Yeah.
So that was a great point about starting implementation of some features in React Native in enterprise setup. You said, let's create a goal. One perfect example would be a feature that existing on web. Set a deadline, stick to it, and like show the efficiency to both stakeholders and developers. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about getting the whole organization on board with adopting React Native. And again, let's start from hurdles. What should I expect along the way? How to deal with hurdles from stakeholders, from developers?
Yeah, I think something we already touched on briefly is getting the buy-in from native developers, because if we're talking about introducing React Native in enterprises, obviously there's some kind of a native mobile team in place already there, right? And as I mentioned before, you can often see two types of groups: people that are open to learn a new skill set and use it in parallel with other skills they have. And by that, I mean native skills. Or you have people that need some convincing because they feel threatened about them or their technology being replaced by something newer. And oftentimes, especially in enterprises, this might seem like a business decision affecting the delivery team. And I think it makes it even more important to, first of all, be transparent about this change and give your developers this operational standpoint, this viewpoint that you mentioned earlier on, Rafael, because I think most of the developers do not think that way from this operational standpoint if they're not like higher in the hierarchy of the company. And I think this transparency might be really eye-opening for them about like what are the main benefits of React Native for them in this particular project.
Yeah, and just to digress a little bit, I find that tech companies don't really think necessarily, in tight operational ways, because there's so much money on tech, right? You can just get developers, and they take their time. And I've been that developer who takes a lot of time to implement something. So in tech companies, you don't really have kind of like the intense pressure to deliver necessarily that you would have in other industries, like the restaurant industry, for example. In a restaurant, you go to work and you got to deliver something by the end of the day, right? You got to deliver a bunch of things. Whereas in tech, you necessarily don't. And so I think that's one of the things that you might have to watch for, is just the way that the organization operates around this initiative. In a large enterprise, it could go slow. So I think what's important to have is maybe like an executive sponsor or like a champion, like a high-level champion, who is going to help you identify who the stakeholders are, help you interview them, and help you figure out what their concerns are, and generally have people within the company who are going to run blocking for you, because what you really want to have is like a good runway to get your project done. And in a big enterprise, I think the project's going to take longer than you think it's going to, because of all these big enterprise operational issues and communication issues. So setting up the environment around the project, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I really like that you mentioned like having this champion on the client side, because while we're all aware of the benefits of React Native, and this champion that's possibly driving this technological change on the client side might be also aware of all the benefits. The other stakeholders might only know React Native from hearing some kind of facts about them, or maybe some gossips, like Airbnb article might come up at some point, because like this is probably one of the biggest misconceptions about React Native, and also like one of the most popular articles that's out there in the web about React Native at the same time, right? So I think like someone on the client side that helps you handle all the objections, and someone that you can help arm with more informative assets really can help you like facilitate the process. And it doesn't mean that it's gonna be a short process, because we're still talking about like huge enterprises and big organizations, but still like it's really valuable to have this person that you know that will help you drive this change.
Yeah, I can't believe I'm still talking about the Airbnb blog post. It comes up every once in a while. And I think that's one of the big misconceptions. I think there's two big misconceptions about React Native. One, that React Native isn't mobile, which is absolutely not true. React Native is absolutely native development. Anything that you can do in native, you can do in React Native, because React Native can be just the business layer of it. And you can control whatever you want on native. But also just the fact that, I guess React Native doesn't work out sometimes. And that's not necessarily the case. I think transformational projects don't work out sometimes, regardless of the technology that you choose. And that has a lot more to do with your company culture, how the company operates, the stability of the teams implementing this. Many times in a big enterprise, you can have really good engineers, but if the enterprise is constantly reorganizing, for example, that makes things harder to implement. So one thing to keep in mind is, if you're going to do React Native in an enterprise, you really need to think about the culture and the people that are going to be involved in this.
Yeah, I think that's a great wrap-up of getting organization on board. Kuba was speaking about developers, about native developers, web developers coming into the project. Rafael, you were saying about the leadership sponsor, about mapping the stakeholders, about getting the buy-in from everyone. And thanks for that wrap-up. So once I, as a CTO, again, introducing React Native to my enterprise project again, once I have the support of both of those areas, how do I educate my team on this new framework in an enterprise setup? And what are some tips for scaling such a team with the time?
Want to go first?
Sure. So I'm going to give you my personal opinion on this, which is not necessarily what tech companies do, but I like having brainstorming and learning sessions with developers. Early on in my experience, I was at a company that hired 2 junior engineers for a React Native application, and I was one of the people leading this React Native application, and I had to get them up to speed. So what I did was, every few days I would just get in a conference room with them and talk for 2 hours about the architecture of the app, how they can navigate it. Whenever they had specific tickets, I would sit down with them and just map things out for them. So I think the process of just sitting together with developers and just talking about the stuff that you're doing, that really accelerates the learning. So you might want to have like workshops, learning sessions, like record some training videos and socialize it. But I think just being together in a room and just talking about what you're doing is really, really helpful. And that's the most efficient way of of distributing the knowledge across your team.
Also, this is a great time to, again, show this organizational benefits, organizational standpoint for all of the stakeholders in the team. You can talk about technology, but you can also show the bigger picture of the whole feature, of the whole domain. How does it impact the product, the business? Kuba, do you want to say something about educating the development teams in React Native, in product domain?
Mm-hmm. I think like what Rafael mentioned is crucial here, basically, because it's the same thing that came up where we were discussing this dev bubble and how it's important to stay up to speed with all the technology changes, but also like from the other perspective, like keeping up with the technology is obviously crucial, but having a solid baseline that you start with is also super important in our perspective, because we often see companies that were fully utilizing the benefits of React Native. So they were like releasing quickly, they were cross-platform, all that good stuff. But at the same time, if you're not being careful, like from our experience, React Native is also a really easy technology to gain technical depth. Yes. And collect some and start seeing performance regressions. So making other developers that might be less experienced with this technology about these potential traps can save you a lot of time and a lot of effort of your team in the future work.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I feel that training, just in general, like regardless of whether you are trying to implement change or not, like just constant training is a really important thing that you should make part of your culture, because I mean, developers have to always be learning. Like any developer that hasn't studied anything in 2 weeks is already behind.
Yeah.
So, you know, having workshops, having show and tells, having guild sessions, those are really effective ways of making sure that developers have uniform knowledge about your product.
Yeah. Communication is the key, and not only in development setting, but like in everyday life, in work life, in personal life, you have to communicate. Everyone has to know what is the bigger picture, because only then people can navigate the decisions, can navigate the small decisions that impact the bigger picture. I want to turn the tables a little bit for this next question. So again, I'm a CTO of my enterprise setup, and we've introduced React Native, all three of us, to our product. And guys, it doesn't work. I can see bugs, I can see bad reviews, and I can see that over time, it takes longer for my team to deliver the features. So what do you think might be possible causes for this?
I have a good one. So this often happens when you have web developers with a lot of who have spent a lot of time building web applications. When you move into React Native. As Kuba mentioned earlier, when you build stuff on desktop, you have a lot of horsepower. So you don't necessarily see the performance issues that your web app has. But to be honest, most of the web apps out there probably have huge performance issues. When you move to mobile, you're working with less horsepower and you need to be more efficient. So a lot of the issues that are hidden on web, they become really apparent on mobile, and you can have things like laggy screens, right? You always want to try to keep your application running at 60 frames per second. And I know a lot of like React Native apps that often just go down to like 10 frames per second, or like they might even take like 2 or 3 seconds to render one frame because they're doing a lot of background work. And so at that point, you really want to start thinking about training your developers in React performance. I would say that a lot of the performance issues don't really happen because like React Native, the technology, or like anything on native, but they happen because of foot guns that happen in React. For example, like you might not have optimized functional components, or you might not have stable values being returned from hooks or something like that. So those are the type of things that are going to cause lag on your application. And when your application is really laggy, then that's when users are going to start rating your app really low.
Yeah. Like from my perspective, like I mentioned earlier, this possibility of how you can structure the teams and the flexibility you have using React Native. But it's also like a two-edged sword, because at some point when you're scaling your team and you have a big number of developers contributing to a single code base, oftentimes like the responsibilities and the boundaries between those teams are not that obvious for everyone, and you need to have someone in place that will make sure that each team knows what they're responsible for, and all the topics that are oftentimes neglected because there's no team designed to take care of them, like the developer experience, the tooling around it, CI/CD pipelines. Those are the topics that need to be taken care of, especially if you have big teams. So I think like oftentimes organizations do not realize that they actually might need like a fully separate team, even like an infrastructure team that will take care of the stuff to, for once, improve the developer experience, and then again also remove some blockers that might be slowing down your development process.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really important for enterprises. Like, so when you're a scale up, that's when you want to start thinking about having kind of like a core development team that's going to support the rest of your React Native developers. And that team should be looking at, the developer experience, making sure that, React Native's updated. That's another source of like issues, like when you fall behind on React Native versions. Also take care of things like making sure that, your application has TypeScript set up, making sure that you have good ESLint rules, making sure that, when you have your continuous integration, that you are running some sort of like integration tests or visual regression tests as well. There's a lot of tests. There's like a big pipeline. Your development pipeline has a lot of stages, right? From developer experience to delivery. So having a team that is focused on making sure that that pipeline is smooth will help the overall process, and it will help make sure that the quality of the app and the responsiveness of the app is of a high quality. The other thing that I wanted to mention is not necessarily a React Native thing, but just a general code base thing, is make sure that somebody is responsible for any part of your code base. When a scale up gets big, you kind of start seeing layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of code revisions. I feel like you kind of start seeing the tree rings, of the code base as it gets bigger. And oftentimes, there's parts of the code that are just not owned by anybody, because there used to be a team that did this part, but then they got reorganized and this guy left the company and this other person now is like director somewhere else, and they don't work on that anymore. So if you're a CTO, just make sure that you have an eye on code ownership all throughout your code base.
I really like the analogy, and I already imagine how the rings in the tree relate to like different coding style or like different naming patterns in code base that evolves over the years. And I really like the analogy.
Yeah, and with a big product, like a lot of dependencies and some of possibly parts of the code being unattended, I can also definitely see that some developers losing trust in the code that they're working on.
Yeah.
And I think it's another thing that may really slow down the process that you have in place, and it's not really that visible to an eye unless you really start talking on a low level with all your developers.
Yeah, especially to a new developer. I've been a new developer coming into a large code base. The issue of trust. If you're a scale up and you're hiring people, you should keep in mind that the talented developers that you hire, they're going to have an opinion on the way that your code base is in its current state. A lot of times it's just, for example, very clear that developers have been in a bubble. This is not talking specifically about React Native or anything like that, but just about large code bases. And this is why we mentioned that it's important for developers to keep their ear to the ground, make sure that they're following what the new best practices that the industry is establishing. Because oftentimes you come into like a really old code base that doesn't really follow modern development standards. And so, somebody who came from like a startup, where they were using the latest and greatest might come into like an enterprise and, they might feel a little bit stuck with some of the decisions that have been made in that code base over time.
Okay. Thank you, guys. I have few last questions for this episode, and we are wrapping up. But few last questions from the last subject that I want to talk about, which is React Native as a product. So we know that React Native is an open source project that is maintained by Meta and Microsoft and companies like CallStack, and by a huge community of open source contributors. So being in that context of React Native as a product, let's start with the frustration. What is your biggest frustration with the React Native right now?
I think my biggest frustration with the vanilla React Native is that it just never got productized. As I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I was really, really influenced by Flash when I was coming up as a developer. That was kind of like my first professional gigs. So there is the development world before the iPhone and the development world after the iPhone. Mm-hmm. And so the iPhone just kind of transformed how everything works, like the whole technology ecosystem. But before we had the iPhone, we had big companies making big development tools, like really, really high quality development tools like Flash. Like the Flash editor was really, really good. I could rely on it. I could do a lot of really cool stuff with animations, with coding, etc. And so that kind of age of the web ended. And then we moved on to kind of like more open sourcey things. And I think the big frustration is that there hasn't been kind of like this singular vision of what React Native should be. React Native has a large open source surface area. So that has some benefits in that anybody can contribute, but the level of experience for a React Native developer is just never going to be to the level that a big company who's productizing their technology is going to provide you. So as a React Native developer, you always need to be hunting for information. You need to be keeping your ear to the ground, etc. Obviously,
I can definitely sympathize with that. Being someone that wants to know what's next, I need to follow few different sources to really stitch the story together. And I hope this will change in the future. That in the future, like we have like a governing body for React Native, but like you said, the surface area is just so big, and the dependencies on different open source libraries and authors are so large that you really need to listen to a few different sources to have a proper overview of what's going on, what's going to be next. Okay, so frustrations out of the way. Let's talk about hopes. Let's talk about opportunities. What opportunities do you see?
Yeah, we touched on the open source topic, and I think like what's great for React Native is, again, this ability to be able to open source the solutions. And I think what we're really proud of here at CallStack is that those are not only the solutions that we are the authors of, but for example, projects that we are working on with our client, like for example, Reassure, so the tool to monitor like performance regression that was built together with Entain. It gives you like a lot of possibilities. And I think like for big organizations specifically, seeing that there's a different brand standing behind a solution allows you for an easier buy-in and possibility of using this library inside your product, because like otherwise there's some great open source projects that you will never invest as an enterprise, because you're not sure if a developer will change jobs and stop maintaining the product, or something will get broken and you won't be able to fix it quickly enough. So it's definitely great to see companies being open to do this kind of stuff in the open source space. And I think it's pretty unique and great for React Native.
Yeah, sorry that I paused there because I couldn't think of which one to speak to first. So along
Talk
those
about
lines,
all of them. Talk about all of
Yeah.
them. That's the last question. And this show is called the React Native Show podcast. So we can talk about opportunities and benefits all you want. I'm all ears.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about bigger companies developing their products in React Native. Microsoft, obviously, it's a big one. I think Microsoft's involvement gives me a lot of confidence in React Native, particularly because they have historically been a very, very good developer company. Remember, developers. Yeah, that's what Microsoft is. And I'm really excited about that. I think the biggest opportunity that there is in the space, though, is really defining very well what the production pipeline of developing a React Native application is like. So as I've moved from company to company, I've seen that everybody's trying to solve the same issues. Everybody's just like kind of working from scratch on, for example, like continuous integration, visual regression testing, and that kind of stuff. So I would love for there to be like a consortium of React Native companies. Obviously, there's like a lot of them who are very influential in the space. Kind of thinking about like what's the idealized frictionless React Native development pipeline. That's like a really fuzzy idea, but as somebody who's worked in the space, I kind of don't want to keep thinking about these issues every time I start a new project. I just want to have these things solved because we're not inventing necessarily anything new. Like every company is just trying to figure out their own way.
I definitely get what you're saying. And I think this also ties into this distributed truth about React Native, because those solutions are out there, but you just have to know which one to use and like stitch them all together yourself as a company. But I can see what you're saying about the opportunity here. Kuba, we should probably try to invest some time in this space, in stitching together a comprehensive guide to like React Native development experience, to React Native development pipeline. I think this could be a great source of knowledge for companies to, and maybe not only because like Kuba said, the great opportunity here is freedom, is flexibility. So not necessarily show one only proper way, because there are few different things for visual regressions that you can use, for CI/CD that you can use, but maybe show some of the paths so that not everyone has to invent the wheel for the first time for themselves. Great idea, Rafael. Thank you.
Yeah, I think exactly what Rafael mentioned, that oftentimes organizations are just trying to solve the same issues over and over again. And I think this is what made, for example, our React Native optimization guidebook so popular. Because nothing revolutionary, it's just like a set of best practices from our experience gathered in one place. And you can clearly see that companies are benefiting from it, and we touch on various topics there, but it's not everything, all the issues related with React Native. So I think it's a clear proof that organizations are really actually struggling with all the same things oftentimes. And again, we come back to the topic of, keeping the ear to the ground and just allowing community to find this maybe single source of truth. I'm not sure if I would call it that way, but maybe just like a unified source of best practices they can use to avoid any kind of struggle with the same issues that they've been experiencing.
That's my title for the next ebook, Kuba. Unified source of the
of best practices.
All of the words that you just said. It's a great title for our next ebook. With that, let's wrap it up. Thank you, guys. I'm gonna do a brief recap of everything that we said in this episode. So I sat down in the other room, but I'm still in Wrocław, and guys are in the podcast studio. I sat down with Rafael and Kuba to talk about React Native at scale. So we've ranted a bit, but we've also discussed some very optimistic ideas. We talked about differences between startups and scale-ups and enterprises. We talked about the ins and outs of adopting React Native in such scenarios. We talked about optimizing React Native products that React Native is present in already, and the goods and bads of React Native as a product. So again, thank you guys so much for coming to the show. Thank you, Rafael. Thank you, Kuba.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone that is listening to us and watching us on YouTube. And you can check out more episodes of this React Native at Scale series, or just the React Native Show podcast on our YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. And please comment and share in social media. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.